I'm recording right now.
Perfect. Let's record this.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to your Bedroom Super Producer podcast. We are your hosts. My name is JT.
My name is BK.
And today we have a very special subject, a producer that I have admired for the better part of, I'd say, 30 years now. And he would certainly be on my Mount Rushmore of greatest producers of all times, across all genres, across any metric really that you can measure success with. Who am I talking about, BK?
Well, I think you're talking about Mr. Andre Young, aka Dr. Dre, born in 1965, raised in Compton. I think a lot of people know Compton, even if they've never been. Compton, Los Angeles. And well, you're absolutely right. I think is one of our idol when we were younger. I'd say all the way from, I think he's kind of the king of the whole gangster rap movement. I have to say, all the way from NWA to basically the whole West Coast G-Funk subgenre based on more those slushy, nice synthesizer sounds with those big drums. So that's what we're going to talk about this week, all the way from The Chronic, all the way to 2001, and we'll go through everything, Aftermath, all the way from Death Row Records, and going through all the way from Eminem to 50 Cent, and many, many adventures that this awesome producer has had over the years.
Indeed, there's going to be a lot to cover, so we'll do our best. If we forget one seminal album,
yeah, I'm sure we're gonna forget stuff, but
so let's start with G-Funk, shall we? Because in the 80s, mid 80s to the end of the 80s, hip hop really was all about whatever was happening on the East Coast and especially New York. And as you said, the G-Funk era came out with the synthesizers and the more laid-back grooves and the funkier bass lines and all of that. And I think it really changed the landscape of hip-hop for the better.
But that was a little bit after, like, the sort of kind of revolution of gangster rap. G-Funk came a little bit, like, mostly like in the 90s, 92, right?
Yeah, I would say arguably
because before that, that was more gangster rap, right? Like for me, let's say Dr. Dre, the first time I ever heard about him was 88, and it was NWA.
True. But they still had, the 808s, and it was different from New York rap for sure.
Yeah, but it was still like mostly based on on a lot of samples.
I mean, yeah, you're right. There's this one joint off of 1988's. What's the name of the NWA album that came out that year?
Like for me, like the album that like I listened to, and it was like very like I remember when I lived in California, it was very difficult to get your hands on it and just to listen to it. But just finding a way to listen to Straight Outta Compton, the album and the track, and also like songs like "Fuck That Police," it was pretty eye-opening for a young kid.
Would you say that back in those days, Dr. Dre's productions were already groundbreaking? Because I wasn't really listening to NWA back then. I started to listen to rap more in the early 90s. And so, yeah, I don't have context really to judge Dr. Dre's productions compared to his peers.
I'm not sure it was groundbreaking back then, but I'm not an NWA expert. Like I said, maybe know 2 songs. Like I say, "Fuck the Police," "Straight Outta Compton," right? That's also how personally I got to know Ice Cube. I wouldn't say groundbreaking, but I think today, listening back to the songs, I find that there was still kind of he already kind of had a knack to choose those breaks that not necessarily everyone would be using. That like after a while everyone started using them, but the way he chopped samples, the way the breaks were organized, the way each rapper had their own like section in the song, I think it was something. It was pretty creative for back then, and then everyone started doing it. But I'm not gonna say that his sound was as well refined as it was later on. Let's say the Chronic and the the albums after. But I think there was already a little spark. What do you think?
I mean, like I said, I'm not really well versed in the whole NWA stuff. I mean, to me, I always liked each individual member's solo stuff better than when they came together. Like Eazy, especially, I liked his solo stuff. Weirdly enough, because he's not a great rapper by any stretch of the imagination. But I mean, to me, like I discovered Eazy with his incredible diss track, 187 Killer, and actually Ice Cube even much later than that, way after Vaseline and all of that stuff. So, I mean, to me, I know that it's been said that Dr. Dre had a better sound, better mixing than everybody else. But I can't really comment on that because I didn't know, like I said, the landscape. To me, Dr. Dre really fell on my radar in '92 with his classic, The Chronic.
Yeah, of
So
course.
maybe
Well,
we
that's
should fast forward to that and talk about a little bit like the birth of G-Funk, really.
yeah,
So what struck me, as we've talked about in the intro, was the use of synthesizers,
yeah,
because in East Coast rap, it was almost blasphemy. Obviously, things have changed tremendously, but back in those days, I remember being a young teenager full of testosterone, and anything that was synthesizer based to me was soft. You
yeah.
know, if you had women singing on the chorus, that was deemed soft. So you
Soft.
really, you really didn't want to be soft or seen as soft back in those days. And I mean, I wasn't ready at first, but I think that the first single off of the Chronic, which would be Nothing But a G Thing in my to my knowledge, I think that was the first one that had a video.
My personal favorite was "Let Me Ride" because I think I listened to the Chronic a little bit later than I didn't start listening to it in '92. I listened to it probably 5, 6, 7 years later, and for me, it was kind of my introduction to hip hop bass. And "Let Me Ride" has this particular bass line that I still enjoy today.
Yeah, actually, Let Me Ride is a true testament to Dr. Dre's evolution, um, where he started to interpolate samples and have them completely replayed by session players. Let Me Ride is certainly, I don't know if on the original album it was the 7-minute long version, which has like the brass section, the, like you said, the incredible funk bass, the guitarists, and then I guess there's some keyboard players also on there. But what I'm trying to say is nobody in the hip hop world was doing that at that time. And so it was really a jump in terms of production quality with these songs.
Yeah, true.
And from there, really, that's, I think, where Dr. Dre separated himself from the pack, because his productions were so far ahead in terms of writing, mixing, he was really able, after a short while, to make music that was as well made as his heroes. People like George Clinton, Funkadelic, Parliament, all of these guys that he sampled heavily. He was then able to just get like the DNA of those songs, like just a little 2-bar bass loop that was really, really catchy, and then create a whole composition around that.
That album, for me anyways, kind of cemented the way he treated drums, the way his drums bang. I think even till this day, were kind of like, I think The Chronic was the first experiment that went really well in terms of the way that drums banged. For me, it was something that hit me literally in the face. I don't know about you, but the drums on that album were something.
Yeah, well, an easy example would be Nothing But a G Thang, where, he kept pretty much untouched Leon Hayward. So what's the guy's name? It's Leon Haywood, not Hayward.
Leon Haywood. Okay.
Yeah. So he had kept the sample pretty much untouched and just looped it. But what was interesting is his ability to layer the 808 under it. And I mean, on the East Coast, they were also layering, drum samples, kicks and snares from drum breaks, and have little 808s here and there under it, but nothing like what Dr. Dre did. And so I think, to your point, the layering and the mixing was where he made his mark and basically went above and beyond the competition.
I think he kind of tailored his sound to be very, very simple. People sometimes were trying to do something very complicated. He just used like hard drums, a melody from a sample or something, and like a bass. And like all his beats on The Chronic have that foundation that he knows really exactly what elements to put together so that it fits really, really nicely. Like, that's why I admire about the Chronic.
Interesting. As obviously this approach founded on minimalism will certainly become more and more Dr. Dre's secret to having the loudest and
less elements,
heaviest mixes. And so let's fast forward a bit from the incredible Chronic to something, in my eyes, that's even more incredible, and that would be Snoop Dogg's first album. Is it 92 or 93?
Was it the same year as The Chronic?
No, it was a year or two after. Let me just pull it up real quick. So 93, he came out with Doggy Style. And
so a year after, yeah.
Well, to me, there are probably like two songs that I'll fast forward or skip over on the whole album. I think that by far this is one of the strongest collection of beats and songs that were solely produced by Dr. Dre.
Yeah, true.
With standouts such as Gin and Juice, The Shiznit. Lottie Dottie was a tough one to accept for me at first, because it borders on R&B, very slow, very like melodic in a way. But Murder Was the Case, It Ain't No Fun, which is probably still my favorite Snoop Dogg song. G's and Hustlers and Pump Pump are also incredible tracks, incredible choice of samples. And I think that was the last time that Dr. Dre let samples be used as freely as that in his productions.
Well, I think he got inspired by the fact that, like, even if you take a look at his choice of samples, he was going towards those little instrumental snippets, those little bass lines that were alone at a particular spot in a track, or that little vocal thing slowly. So you saw that he started to kind of think like a musician, having wanted the separate sound of things and wanted just the bass and just the keyboards of this and that. I think that's what influenced him later to slowly but surely, but start to work with live players.
Yeah, and uh, a great example of him actually finding those little gems inside of samples and interpolating them. For our listeners out there, maybe I'm not using the word interpolation correctly, but as far as I understand it, interpolation is basically replaying a master recording which you don't have the rights to in order. It's kind of like a cover, basically. And in the sampling world, I think that if you do not have the rights given by the owner of the master, you can still use that interpolation, give some of the publishing to the artists, and use that bit of music.
So something like you're using something that you've inspired yourself by something, but it's very close to the real thing, and you don't give them full royalties, right?
Something like that, because obviously, and the example I wanted to use was "What's My Name." Is that the original name of the track? Who am I? Who am I? Parentheses. What's my name?
Yeah.
Which was the lead single off of the album. You can clearly tell that he replayed a George Clinton Mini Moog bass line in there.
Mm-hmm.
But because they actually replayed it, it's not a sample per se. It's an interpolation, and I think that's also a good example of how Dr. Dre was actually able to improve on the sonic qualities of those samples by recreating them in the studio with session players.
And at the same time, you get to learn what you like the most about the sample you use by replaying them, by, like you say, interpolating them.
Exactly. And I think that he'll take that trick and run with it for the rest of his career, really. So moving on from Snoop Doggy Dogg, there were other classics. He really made another huge mark in 95 with two projects mainly. The Dogg Pounds' first album, and then the infamous instant classic, incredible song, California Love, starring none other than Tupac Shakur.
Yeah. It's strange sometimes to look back and kind of to see the interconnections between all these West Coast artists. I'm always dumbfounded when I look back in time and see, and they were on the same label. They worked together, and it's always interesting to see the dynamics between these artists, and you see how he's pretty much part of history,
Absolutely. And so we're right in the middle of the death row era, and if you studied a bit of the history of death row and of Dr. Dre, it really wasn't a match made in heaven. I think that Dr. Dre really wanted to focus on the music, didn't want to have all this gang banging stuff going on in the studio. And so he really didn't put out a whole lot of stuff, aside from his classics, The Chronic, Doggy Style, and that Dog Pound album, which at the time was really, really a big hit. It was critically acclaimed. It probably went multi-platinum. I don't have the exact number, but you could tell that the recipe that Dr. Dre had with these death row artists was pretty much unmatched in the hip hop world. Yes, there were great artists on the East Coast, namely, Biggie, and the whole Bad Boy stuff. Then, LL Cool J. Was Run DMC still in the game? They were doing stuff with Aerosmith. I mean, at that time in the mid 90s, it was really all about the West Coast.
Well, they had such a special sound, that's why it was all about them, right?
And so you could credit most of that to Dr. Dre. Aside from obviously all of the Tupac stuff, which unfortunately wasn't produced by Dr. Dre, because as I've said, Dr. Dre really wasn't comfortable as an artist in the death row environment. And it's a shame because they could have done by far the highest selling, grossing albums with Tupac. And I think that's part of the reason why Tupac dissed Dr. Dre later on, because he didn't get some of that love,
But you're totally right. I think at some point in the whole death row thing, he just wanted out because he really wanted to focus on music, and I think he saw that like ultimately everyone was sort of running towards like catastrophe. Like Tupac ran towards it, and I don't think he knew where it was heading, right? And I think at some point I saw a couple of interviews and the artists and like people that were in the environment back then, and they say that like Dre was like in another studio or in like another room, and he didn't want nothing to do with all the gangbanging and all the other stuff and the drug dealing that were going on, right? I think in a way he was right, because like Tupac is the perfect example, like so talented, and look what happened.
I think that California Love especially is a very, very important song for us to study, because this is where the Dr. Dre drum sound, in my humble opinion, was put forth in the world. If you listen close to the Joe Cocker woman to woman sample, you will hear the exact same piano, and you will be very easily able to tell that the sample wasn't really chopped up or anything fancy like that. But what's really, really different is the bass line and the drums. And it's so highly characteristic of Dr. Dre, the way the smack goes, the way the low end is extremely controlled, yet very powerful. In my opinion, there's nothing quite like it. And from then on, the Dr. Dre drums will be something that is so far ahead of the pack. It's not even funny.
I think he had like a very clerical approach to it, and in a way kind of very technical. And I think he knew how to put the right elements together and still use that analog fatness. And I think he became very good, like technically and even at engineering, to be able to have those drums smack the way they smack. In part also, like we said earlier, to the simplicity of some of the beats, and even the simplicity of the percussions. There's no trap hi-hats in there, right?
Well, trap hi-hats, no electronic hi-hats. Maybe there was a way for Dr. Dre to pick out drum sounds that would really cover very specific areas of the frequency spectrum.
Exactly.
And I think he was really alone in that sense, in terms of really picking his sounds to achieve something sonically in the mix. Whereas most of the other producers would pick out, I mean, don't get me wrong, great samples and sounds, but I think Dr. Dre was pretty much the only one at that time engineering and mixing his own instrumentals. And that's part of the reason why I think he was so ahead in terms of sonics.
He went right away with he wanted sounds to be separate. And the fact that he started separating the sounds very early in his career, that's what gave him that that specialness, right? To even the drum sound and everything. And like even when we said earlier, I think even the way he chose the breaks, he didn't always choose like busy breaks and everything. Maybe something for like a melody or something, but I think he would choose his breaks, like you said, like in a frequency range. And if he would combine samples, he would really have an idea to say, okay, this is going to be in the low end, this is going to be in the mid or something, and he would choose the samples consequently. And then to add on top of it, he would EQ them in a certain way so they would like each have their own spaces. And I think that's the way he used to be able to get that fatness and everything. So you don't have any frequencies clashing together, and that's something that's very difficult to do when using samples.
Absolutely. And you're right also that he would pick out, simpler breaks and stuff in a way to make his mixing job easier. I wanted to bring the listeners' attention to an undercurrent that was going on pretty much at the same time. I'm talking about, Texan hip hop stuff from the Rap A Lot crew and productions, especially by T-Mix and someone who we covered already on the podcast, Mr. Mike Dean. And if we want to compare, as we do in, let's say, the basketball realm where we try to pick out GOATs, if you compare the Rap A Lot stuff in the mid 90s to the Dr. Dre produced G-Funk stuff, you will see similarities. It's very funky. Usually they will layer acoustic drums with electronic drums to get the best of both worlds, and then keep maybe the 808 hi-hats to have that little sheen in the top end. Whereas, on the East Coast, they would really just sample real hi-hats and nothing else.
They were purists on the East Coast when you think about it.
Yeah.
There was things that you couldn't do. And on the West Coast, it was kind of the West Coast and like Texas and middle of America or something. They were kind of open, and they used keyboards and they used synth and 808s and real drums and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. And so all of that to say that in Texas, they would kind of mimic the West Coast sound, with synthesizers, real bass players, real guitarists in the studio, keyboard players. But what I'm trying to say is the smack is completely different. The knock of the drums, the low end, that's a great way to tell sonically how far ahead Dr. Dre was with his sonics. And so that's really interesting. There's still some incredible rap that came out of Texas, don't get me wrong, but it's just a testament to Dr. Dre's ear. And you talked about, the analog aspect of the low end and the richness of the Dr. Dre sound. And let's talk about real quick about what equipment was behind this magical sound.
Which album?
Yeah, I mean, to me, there are two main pieces of gear that if you want to have the Dr. Dre sound, you will need to use, which are Akai's MPC 3000.
The MPC 3000, I think, was like the workhorse, but I believe didn't he have like 4 or 5 at the same time, so that he wouldn't need to load all the drum sounds every time.
He did.
From
like
this,
5 or 6 even.
5 or 6, and all the drum sounds would be already loaded, and they would be pretty much even linked together. And he would use one to trigger the sounds on the keyboards. So
I'm sure he did.
So
especially
you would have
in the mid-90s.
So you would have kind of the swing of the MPC that would fit with the other drum kits, but he was sequencing an external keyboard with the MPC. So just that, I believe, is something that like separated him from other producers. The hand like the he wanted to have the music under his fingers, right? And I think the the thing that people really like about the MPC is that you kind of get to, I think you humanize the music, and the fact that you're sampling, that you want it to have a special swing. Also, like the sampling engine, we talked about this, I think, in another episode. The sampling engine on the MPC 3000, you can lower it to what, 14-bit instead of 16, I think, to have a little
That
bit
might
more
be,
a darker sound, I think.
yeah, that might be one of the secrets behind the 3000.
Yeah, kind of like even other samplers, they usually have that because it takes less room, right? But it kind of mangles your sound and gives it that little je ne sais quoi, right? And
Absolutely.
also the swing of the MPC, I think, was renowned, and a lot of producer used it. I don't know. Aside from the MPC, I think another thing that differentiates Dr. Dre was also the fact that he recorded a lot of his stuff through SSL desks. So
Exactly.
he was a firm believer in that analog, that those analog channel on the SSL. Also, I think all vocals and even instruments and everything, he used a lot of Neve preamps. Also, I think to give that analog warmth. And back in the days, also like before editing on a computer, whatever. Well, of course, everything was recorded to tape. So I think that's I think you can feel that that organic sounding analog in his earlier productions.
As you know, I've become a very big fan of the SSL 4G plugin done by UAD.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I mean, obviously it's a software recreation, but there really is a musicality to the EQ of the 4G strip. There really is something about picking out specific frequencies and then boosting them pretty drastically, and then having the G compressor at the very end tame all of that. And I think that
kind of gluing everything back together, basically, right?
Yeah, and for one, there is no other EQ like the SSL 4G. Is it 4E or 4G? I can't remember. It's the E channel, because it's been said that the E channel was like the silkiest E channel, and then the G bus compressor. But yeah, those two things are.
But there's also the G. There's the G channel too.
I read online, I think on Gear Sluts, that the E channel is like more musical, softer to the ear, something to that effect. Whereas the G console is more, gritty. I guess better suited for rock and stuff like that. I think that like the channels are driven harder or something, or at least if you drive them, they'll saturate harder.
Honestly, I love the 4000, the channel strip. It's one of my favorite. I put that shit on everything.
It's also the secret console behind Michael Jackson's Thriller.
There you go. So you see, that's why we put the 4000E on everything. 1979 was a good year.
And yeah, so I mean, it's hard to conceive nowadays that those old school producers were using such classy pieces of gear, where today we try to emulate and achieve some of the same sonics with, a laptop and stock plugins on Ableton or Fruity Loops, FL Studio. Pardon me.
Yeah, it's kind of different. The signal path is a little bit different.
Yeah, it's it's two completely different worlds, really, especially in terms of
The smack is quite different if you compare sound that's going through like an analog console or something that's going like straight out of a sound card from your computer. There's ways to get great results from both, but it's not exactly the same approach, and I think that's sometimes where people fail. Someone who's been working in the box all his life is going to have a hard time on a analog console because it's you don't drive, you don't push the channel the same way. And someone who's been working on an analog console his whole life and used to getting that grit by pushing the channels a little bit too far and to get that beautiful distortion that you get by pushing the channels a little bit harder is going to be so disappointed when he's in the box and he tries to push things and just gets digital clipping.
which is kind of a very sorry answer for analog clipping.
It's not the same. The thresholds are a little bit different. Like in the digital domain, once you're over, and it's 100% out. And the analog, it's gradual, right? So it's not analog clipping is not exactly the same as digital clipping.
But I've seen this guy on Instagram, Decap. He's a kind of a household name when it comes to drum samples, especially on Splice. And he says that if you work on in 32-bit in Ableton Live, you'll get way more headroom and basically get away from that digital clipping issue.
Well, you have more headroom. That doesn't mean that if you go high enough, you're gonna clip, right? But if you're in 32 bits, the margin to get to the top is higher because you have more resolution. You don't work in, but 24 is already pretty high, honestly. But it doesn't hurt to try different things because why not? Like high resolution audio, it's here already. So if it sounds better or it's if you can get that analog grittiness back by working in 32, why not try it at some point?
You know what is my wish list is on my wish list for, the next 10 years? A DAW that fully integrates, and I guess that's going to be Luna, but that fully integrates, let's say, the SSL 4G or 4E console. If each of the channels of your mixer would have that 4E EQ and then the G compressor on each of the channels and on your buses, that would be just out of this world.
I think in Luna you can have that already. There's the preamp or the EQ on each channel I think it's based on a Neve.
Yeah, that's it, but not the SSL. Yeah, and then you got the summing of the Neve console, I think. But to me, the sound, like the sound that my ears are begging for, is really that SSL sound.
I've always believed that the Neve was a little bit warmer and
It is. But the sound of the 80s pop and then hip hop is really the SSL.
Because the SSL, the only reason that it's associated with all these acts is that basically studios in the 80s were tailor-made for rock. So SSL consoles were kind of made for that. And that's why so people learned to make hip hop on SSL consoles, even though I don't know, maybe the SSL is a bit too precise or too. I think there's a war going on between like Neve aficionados and like the SSL purists. Like which one is better, which one drives the channel better, or I don't know. I'd be curious. I don't have enough money yet to be able to compare. I don't even have a room big enough to have an SSL.
Maybe I should get some UAD Neve strips and then compare. I mean, the layout of the plugins to me, I don't know. I feel like the usability is higher with the SSL stuff. Maybe that's just me. But yeah, so going back to Mr. Dre's discography and his evolution as a producer, we could talk real quick about The Aftermath, which was kind of the first failed attempt of Dr. Dre at both, parting ways with Death Row and then trying.
But it was a compilation, no?
Yeah, but you could tell that he wasn't really there yet in terms of picking the right artists, being the label head, and basically kind of wearing all hats to put out a successful album.
Well, first it was like you said, it was the first album after his departure from Death Row, right?
Yep.
And I think that album is kind of his way of rebelling against the whole gangsta rap thing. That's the way I see it. It was a bit soft, right? There was some R&B stuff on it. It wasn't quite him, right?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It
didn't have a particular style. He was kind of trying to move away from his roots that defined him. He wanted to close the door on the whole Death Row thing, kind of with a style that didn't really suit him. I don't know what you think.
Well, I haven't gone through like all of the tracks on whosampled.com, but I think he was going more in the direction of writing his own synthesizer-based music. There weren't as many obvious samples. One thing, though, that is very important in Dr. Dre's sound evolution is the fact that he started to work with Melman on some of those tracks. And you could absolutely tell that stuff like Been There, Done That, and even Keep Their Heads Ringing, which came out the same year or even a year before. But you could tell that Dr. Dre drum sound was getting there. Like the real Dr. Dre sound that we are now used to. And that's part of the reason why I'm mentioning Melman here, because when Melman is credited on a track, you get that drum sound. That extremely gritty New York sound, but with the clean sound of Dr. Dre, the super polished low end, and obviously the rest, like the Moog basses and all of that.
Kind of a failed experiment, but at the same time, I think he learned from it, and we all know what happened after.
Yeah, well, what happened after that? Because it still took a very long while before Dre came out with a very successful project, something that he would actually be proud of putting his Dr. Dre stamp on it.
I think it took a little bit of time for him to find his way and to get back on his feet. And I think personally, maybe you think of this differently. I think when he discovered Eminem, I think that's what gave him that fire mount a comeback. What do you think?
Let's get to Eminem real quick. I just, for our listeners, proper education, there are two projects before Eminem that were also very crucial to the evolution of Dr. Dre. The first of which would be the Firm album with Nas and AZ and Foxy Brown, which was also kind of a flop in terms of sales and all of that. But on there are some real Dr. Dre gems. Songs like Phone Tap and my personal favorite, 5 Minutes to Flush. Go back and listen to the bass line on 5 Minutes to Flush. That's quite something. And then there's a kind of an unofficial release by King T in 1998 called The Kingdom Come. And that's a full-length LP produced entirely by Dr. Dre, or like 95% of it is produced by Dr. Dre. And my brother actually put me on to that project because I don't think it officially was released on a label, and yet it was produced by Dr. Dre at the peak of his craft, and so I'd say most people out there who call themselves Dr. Dre fans have never heard of that project by King T. So if you're out there listening, go listen to King T's The Kingdom Come. That's a full-length LP produced by Dr. Dre that came out actually after The Firm. So let that sink in.
Mm. But King T, I think he was on Chronic 2001, right?
King T might have a verse on there, yes.
I think he'd like Snoop was on it and like Mary J was on it. I think King T was also on it. I'm pretty much sure I've seen the name somewhere.
Yeah, for sure.
For 2001.
For sure. But before we talk about 2001, why don't we talk about Eminem?
When did you first hear Eminem?
When it came out in 99, my friend Big C came to my house with this CD. And at the time, my parents were away. They had taken a month-long, it was 2 weeks long vacation. And so we had the three-story house to ourselves. And I will not say on the air what went on in that house. But what I will say is that we listened to the Slim Shady LP in its entirety with the lights closed. And let's say we had smoked a few cigarettes. And the pictures,
special cigarettes,
they might have been special. At that time, we didn't know. And I mean, the pictures that were painted on that album, both from a beats and a lyrical perspective, was something that we had never heard before in hip-hop. And you're totally right when you say that Eminem being found by Dr. Dre was really what ignited back the real fire inside of Mr. Young.
Yeah. Well, actually, I think it was Jimmy Iovine, I think, put them together. Like, I think he was making Dre listen to cassettes or something or whatever, and like I think Dre said, "What's that?" And I think they were instantly, there was a connection or something of some sort.
Absolutely. I think that, and oddly enough, there are only 3 songs produced by Dr. Dre on that album. But I think that Dr. Dre's sound is all over that album.
But he's executive producer on the album. He didn't produce every track, but he's executive producer, right?
Well, it's on the Aftermath label, so obviously he was executive producer. What I'm trying to figure out if Dr. Dre actually mixed, and I'm not quite sure, but one thing's for sure, the sound of the album is very consistent. Obviously, the standout tracks, most of them were the ones produced by Dr. Dre. The lead single off of the album, My Name Is, and then Guilty Conscience, which was, I think, the second single. So no, actually there's Just Don't Give. That would be the first single released in 98. But then the real waves were made by My Name Is, released in 99. Yeah, so you got that Lalo Schifrin sample on My Name Is, but again, it's treated in a way where the drums are so incredibly in your face that no one else could have done justice just as much as Dr. Dre did on this beat. And then you've got Guilty Conscience, which kind of has that 2001 sound already. He's hinting at that sound.
With Eminem, I think he kind of found that new sound because hip-hop didn't sound like that. And not that the West Coast sound and the G-Funk sound wasn't like a good sound or anything, but it was getting older, right? It was almost 7, 8, 9 years old. I think people were ready for something new, and Dre being Dre, I think he was looking for that special new sound or how he could reinvent or repackage hip-hop for the 2000s, right? I think that with Eminem, he kind of got that, and that's when he became excited about music again, and he was like, "Oh, this is something new. No one has ever done this. we have something.
You're totally right. I think it was an official departure from the G-Funk. The firm still had hints of G-Funk. King T was a G-Funk album, basically. And you're also right that there was a very big rut, actually, of 3-4 years where Dr. Dre almost didn't put anything out, at least not as under his name. He had production credits here and there, and that's something that's going to become more and more characteristic of Dr. Dre over the years, is the long spans between these incredible creative bursts that he has sometimes. But after those bursts, he'll go back in the cave and try to figure out how to reinvent his sound,
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the biggest tragedy with Dr. Dre's career, is his obsession with reinventing and improving and beating his old self, instead of just focusing on, putting out quality material year after year after year. You're not going to put out 2 Chronics, or actually he did put out 2 Chronics, but there was like 10 years between the two, so. But you're totally right. I mean, Eminem showed him different tempos, different styles of productions that he never had dreamed of touching, before that.
Exactly.
And so it was very refreshing. And so from the first Eminem LP, we then go to his second instant classic, 2001.
Oh yes, that's a big one. I don't know if you agree with that, but I think this whole Eminem ordeal kind of pushed him to push himself in a new direction. We hear, you can hear everything just came together, right? Combining the samples, still using the drum machines, those big drums, having those newer synthesizers, the Korg, the Triton. You hear that in there. All these new machines. The Moog is still in there. And also, I think for me, what I loved about Chronic 2001 was it was a rap album, but it was very cinematic. It had kind of like a story to it. It had little intros, and it had sound effects and stuff that blew up and everything. And for me, that just sold me the concept even more. It wasn't just a bunch of tracks. It was a whole, everything was in there. I don't know about you.
Okay, so just for our younger audience out there, let me put back 2001 in context, because something very, very unexpected, strange, and also spectacular happened on the internet prior to the release of 2001. That album was the most heavily leaked album at that time on platforms such as Napster and LimeWire. And so we had unfinished versions of the album floating around on the internet. And I'll always remember my cousin came to a party once with 6 tracks on a CD, and they were all rough cuts of the album. And so we had the incredible pleasure and privilege to hear the unfinished work before it actually got out. And we were dumbfounded because, as you've said, everything, every star, every planet, every universe inside of the universe aligned for this thing to come together. And let me explain what I mean by that. First of all, you've got Dr. Dre's drum guy on every track. So Melman signs the drums on every track. That means that you get the best drums for every single track, because that combination, as we've seen so far, was by far the most efficient, Yeah, efficient combination. But then you add Mr. Piano Man, the Philadelphia keyboard keymeister, Scott Storch.
Well, it's kind of like what we were saying earlier, when we talked about the way he sampled and everything. When I say that everything came together, is that like I think 2001 is like the one of the differences between that album and everything else was mostly the use of real live musicians. You know, that the key players like Kamara Gambon, Scott Storch, guitar player like Sean Cruz, and Mike Elizondo on the bass. Michael Elizondo, who went on to produce stuff for Fiona Apples and like became a pretty good producer by himself. So I think he kind of still had samples, but like kept the best of both worlds. Great drums, his drum guy, great samples, a story for the album, and great musicians. And I believe that most of the tracks were born out of them jamming together and Dre making like beats on the MPC, like on the spot.
Absolutely. That's what I also read. And if that was the case, there aren't too many full-length LPs that have this kind of combination of star session players jamming together, sometimes interpolating classic samples. There really wasn't anything like that before or after.
And let's not forget beautiful arrangements in there, just to embellish the different grooves. Lots of orchestral stuff in there. Combination of like synth strings and brass sounds, and you know, like he really took the time to like craft those little sounds that make like just to make every single sounds or every single beat timeless. And that's what I love about that album.
You're totally right. You know, there were, and what else I also really like about Dr. Dre is the fact that if he'll have this Rose or Wurlitzer track on there, you bet that he'll pass that through like a great chorus unit or a great, you know, delay unit and give it that otherworldly sound. And then you know that he'll also have this incredible mini Moog or SE1 sound design for that intergalactic sound effects in the background that still kind of hints to the G-Funk days. And as you said, that's where he started to work with workstation synths such as the Triton and the Motif. And so he started to integrate orchestral sounds to the hip hop world. And I think he was the first one really to do that also. So 2001 was really, I mean, I don't listen to the album anymore because I listened to it way too many times. But it's such...
You know what I do now?
No?
I listen to the instrumental version.
Smart. Yeah, I mean, those instrumentals are timeless.
Awesome.
They will always be futuristic and of the time at the same time. It's the combination of real world instruments, perfect mixing, incredible drum sounds, and then obviously, you know, the arrangement, as you said, which are always, and that's a key component of the Dr. Dre sound, always to their simplest form or expression. It's really something, that album. It's so cohesive. There aren't too many bad tracks. I mean,
no, not at all. They're pretty much all good. Still Dre,
I mean, there's
Big Egos, What's the Difference, Forgot About Dre, The Next Episode with Snoop, even Housewife is pretty cool. Like for me, like like bass tracks with like good bass lines. Housewife is pretty good.
Great skits.
Bitch, bitch niggas also, that's got a pretty cool bass line. Let's get high, got a pretty good bass line. So, and
Yeah,
then
for
like,
sure.
and then of course like Forget About Dre with Eminem. For me, it's one of those like classic hip hop from the beginning of the 2000s.
And so, how do you keep going after you put out such a strong offering? The next, let's say, 2 years, we will see a lot of great tracks. You know, such standouts as X by Exhibit,
Yeah.
Bitch Please 2 off of Eminem's second album was also incredible. Let's see. Eve's Let Me Blow Your Mind, which was an incredible collabo with Scott Storch. And if I'm not mistaken, Michael Elizondo on the bass also. So you got that trio, incredible trio once again. And then Mary J. Blige's Family Affair, which to this day will play on Quebec's dance floors.
Yeah, all the time. Yeah, you're right. He did produce less album oriented, but more like hit songs oriented. You're right.
And so in 2002, he'll start again to try to produce artists. One project comes to mind, the Truthers album, which was also kind of a flop.
Wasn't it in 2002 that he discovered 50 Cents?
Probably, but the album will be out in 2003. So,
okay.
But still, you've got, again, 3 years of kind of the leftovers of 2001. You know, most of these tracks kind of sound like they came out of the jam sessions between him, Melman, Scott Storch, and Michael Elizondo. I mean, there were incredible tracks that came out in that 3-year span. What else we could tell our listeners to listen to? Break Your Neck, him and Scott Storch on the Busta Rhymes album Genesis, which was absolutely a standout track. But yeah, I mean, you're right. Then the big story is 50 Cent's debut album, Fede. Get Rich or Die Trying. And you could argue that it's Dr. Dre's first executive produced album that really wasn't questionable in terms of success, both from a critic's perspective and obviously
after Eminem.
Yeah.
But even with Eminem, like today we think of it as a success story in that like he became popular. But I think there was a lot of resistance at first, and I would almost even say racism. What do you think? I think people couldn't accept that a white guy from Detroit with blue eyes could be a rapper. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's a great point. I mean, the hip hop community obviously was not liking the fact that a white guy would kind of take the world of hip hop by storm. But because he had MTV blowing behind his sail, there was no stopping Eminem. Like, I mean, as soon as the My Name Is video came out, it was a wrap. No pun intended.
Back to 50.
Yeah, I mean, 50 Cent, but what more can you say? Like, this album, like, propulsed him into the stratosphere, overnight, really. I mean, yes, he had great mixtapes, but once Get Rich or Die Trying came out, it was over. Like, I mean, he was as big as Eminem at that time, and for like we said prior to that, the 3 years that Eminem was out, he was the king of the airwaves. Like there was no one that could compete in terms of sales and airtime with Mr. Mathers. So yeah, I mean, Get Rich or Die Trying is more of an executive produced Dr. Dre album. He's got like 4 beats on there, but you cannot overlook In the Club, which was...
Oh, that song just kicked ass. I think it still plays today.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing quite like In the Club. It was such a huge success, and what I really liked.
But In the Club, that's Scott, right?
No, actually, In the Club was pretty much just Dre and Michael Elizondo. Michael Elizondo was probably on the guitar and bass, and Dre was probably on the Project Sam brass and strings.
But really, it's not. I always thought it was Scott Storch.
Let me see the production credits here. Curtis Jackson, Andre Young, and Mike Elizondo.
All right, yeah. Mike.
So yeah, because I mean, when 50 came out, that's when Storch actually started to feel himself and started to produce everything on his own, and obviously we will hear the degradation of the sound when Scott Storch is doing the drums and doing the bass. You can tell that he doesn't have that
same feel,
and that knowledge of picking the right sounds and mixing everything the way Dr. Dre does. So obviously, people who purchased CDs thought otherwise, because Scott Storch actually became more successful in that period of time than Dr. Dre, but that's something we'll have to talk about in a future episode of the podcast.
That's a great idea.
I don't think we've done Mr. Storch yet, have we?
No, we haven't. A good subject.
Yeah. Going back to Dr. Dre, 50 Cent took the world of hip-hop by storm. And as you said, we didn't have to rely on a white guy anymore, because 50 Cent was back to being the king of the streets, of the club, of the radio. And I mean, then we saw, like some of the G Unit stuff that was quite good. And actually a reunion of Dr. Dre and Scott Storch for Poppin' Them Things and G'd Up off of Beg for Mercy. So you still had the keyboard magic of Scott Storch there with like the proper production that Dr. Dre brings to the table.
Yeah.
Then you got another Eminem album, the Encore album, which was kind of... I mean, at that time, I don't know about you, but I kind of got fed up with Eminem a bit.
For me, after the Eminem show, whatever, it's kind of got old. That whole going after everyone kind of gets old. You can't make 5 albums like that in a row, maybe 2. But then I think he needed to reinvent himself a little bit more. It was a little bit too teenagey for me.
Yeah, exactly. Stuff like Just Lose It were too cartoonish. To me, like the standout Dr. Dre production on that album is Rain Man. If you can't recall it, go back after the episode, listen to that one. It's a good, like it's nothing fancy in terms of instrumentation or melodies or chords, but the production again is so rock solid that to this day, that's kind of one of the songs that I try to emulate whenever I'm trying to, program drums that hit as hard as Dr. Dre's. Yeah. And then the world of hip hop is once again taken by storm in 2005 with another Aftermath signee, I think, just for one album though. Yeah. And that would be The Game.
As I like to call him, 50 Cent 2. He just had more tattoos on his face.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it's a shame that they had such a long-standing feud because they really were a hit making duo. I mean, whenever 50 was penning the hooks and the game spinning the street bars for the verses, it was a crazy combination.
Yeah,
Something we haven't seen a duo like that yet. Since, I mean, two rappers really filling their roles to perfection. I mean, it's a shame that they started to feud because they would have made so many incredible hits together. Going back to 50 and Eminem, I think that they both started to, and I can't quite tell if it was Dre that didn't have the goods, but I mean, Eminem started to produce his own stuff a lot, and he's just really not one of my favorite producers. I'll just leave it at that. And then 50, he had a few bangers with Dre and then with Scott Storch, but again, they kind of seemed to part ways creatively somehow around 2005, you know? Like The Massacre by 50 had 2 songs on there. Out of Control was quite good. Guns Come Out, I mean, I don't even remember the beat off the top of my head, so it can't be that much of a classic. But yeah, I mean, after that, to me, the most important album that was produced by Dr. Dre is probably Busta Rhymes' The Big Bang in 2006.
There was like a one track that I really liked from Dre, the one with Justin and Timbaland and Missy Elliott, Bounce in 2008 on Shock Value, the Timbaland.
But I don't think Dre had any input on the production side.
Not on the production, but I think he rapped on it, right?
Yeah, for sure.
No, kind of honestly, I kind of lost track a little bit of Dre after 2000, what? 2003,
I guess.
2003, 2008, something like that.
Yeah.
In that range, they kind of got like, there were a couple of productions here and there, like a couple of featurings here and there. You rapped on a couple, and then I never got into the whole Compton thing and even the movie. I don't know. I just didn't get into it. What about you?
Well, I mean, like to me, The Big Bang was a big shift for Busta Rhymes, and I thought that the production was stellar. Yeah. Somehow it didn't sell, and I think that's why Busta Rhymes was dropped from Aftermath. But to me, there are incredible songs on there. You know, Get You Some. The intro of the album is is huge. In the Ghetto, Cocaina, Legends of the Fall Offs are great tracks.
Yeah, and then that was a great album.
Yeah, and then I think he had a few good tracks on Jay-Z's Kingdom Come.
Yeah, and didn't he do Blueprint 2 initially? No.
Let me see.
The Watcher or something? No.
Yeah, I think you're right. Let me pull up the Blueprint 2. He did The Watcher 2.
I think I remember something with Jay-Z.
But yeah, I mean, on Kingdom Come, there was a new sound for Dr. Dre. And I think, again, to me, it's all about the drums. And he really went kind of out of control with those huge claps and snares. And Lost One, Trouble. And then on Snoop Doggy Dogg's The Blue Carpet Treatment, there was Imagine, which to me are all kind of they seem to be beats produced in the same sessions and kind of sound the same. And as you've mentioned earlier in the podcast, he was really trying to minimize the number of instruments, so much so that I felt like some of those beats were underproduced, if that's possible.
Like not enough content. Yeah, something.
Yeah, like there you needed kind of a B section or a chorus with more instruments, but for some odd reason, he wouldn't give that to the listeners, and so those beats kind of fell to the wayside.
Didn't he?
Um,
Did he produce? Didn't he do this song with Rick Ross? Three Kings. Did he rap on it or he produced it too?
well, he certainly produced some of it.
I'm always wondering.
Yeah, so that's with Jay-Z and Rick Ross. Let me see. But it does sound like a Dr. Dre produced track. But
Right?
let me see. Three Kings actually it's produced by Jake One.
Okay. No,
So
so he's just rapping on it. All right.
yeah, but I guess because of the types of drums, again, they kind of felt like that was a joint they needed Dre over, But yeah, it's a good find. I mean, it was a good track. But then again, those like the end of the 2000 going into the 2010s was kind of where again we needed more from Dre and we didn't get that, and we would have, like you said, we would have to wait all the way to 2015 to get Dr. Dre's Compton, and I think we could end the discussion on that project just just because we don't want to do a 2-hour long episode.
Yeah.
But what do you think? What were your initial thoughts on Compton?
I have to admit, Compton I know nothing about. I think it's one of those.
No.
It's one of those projects that I know nothing about. Have you listened to it extensively?
I did. When it came out, I was in full analysis mode.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, I was kind of trying to understand the genius behind the project because there are no standout singles.
No.
There's nothing really for the club. It does not bang like what we were used to. Like the big old drums are not there.
Did you like the Kendrick Lamar one?
Yeah, I mean, so the ones that I really liked were Deep Water. What else? Talking to My Diary, I liked. But other than that, I mean,
Is the Ice Cube one good?
yeah, Issues. I'd have to go back because again, nothing really stood out production-wise. Like I was waiting for something really catchy to come on, and that sort of didn't happen. Like it's impeccable. Like the live drums that they dubbed and the production is extremely high level, but it's just how can I put it? It's like they focus too much on recording techniques and mixing techniques instead of just finding good chords and melodies and good, just focusing on good songwriting, I guess. I mean, who am I to judge Dr. Dre? But that's how I felt, and I mean, I listened to the album for a few months, and then I never went back to it. So, it is what it is. And then obviously, Dre made a fortune off of the headphone business.
Yeah,
and we really haven't heard a whole lot from him music wise since then.
maybe he's focusing on something else and more on business or other endeavors. It's okay to have different fields to evolve in life, right?
Yeah, I mean, 2016, there's one T.I. track. Then there's a few Eminem songs. 2020, Music to Be Murdered By. I haven't listened to that album yet, so maybe that's what I'll do after we stop this episode. And then Anderson .Paak,
You did a Nas track in 2020 this year, no? Or was it released?
It's not on the listing I have right here on Wikipedia, but you might be right. Hopefully he has some stuff that's going to come out soon, but really to me, I stopped like kind of searching for Dr. Dre productions after 2015. Just because the landscape changed so much in hip hop that, like disappointment from the Compton album to, Trap getting all the attention was kind of where the whole I don't listen to Dr. Dre stuff anymore happened.
Like other things happen, so sometimes you stop listening to a certain artist. It's not that it's not good, but there's only 24 hours in a day. It doesn't mean that it's not good. It just means that we try maybe to listen to other different artists. All right. Well, good talk. You want me to take it away, JT? Or you want to do the outro this time?
I can do the outro, but what I really want to know is what are your all-time favorite Dr. Dre productions?
My all-time favorite Dr. Dre production, I'm gonna have to say Forgot About Dre, the next episode, which I like a lot. Let Me Ride, and probably Nothing But a G Thing. Those are my top 4. What about you?
Those are all excellent picks. I'm trying to point our listeners into some directions that more obscure. So obviously, one of my favorites of all time will always be X by Exhibit. I've mentioned that track already. And then on the more gangsta side, I think that G'd Up by Gorilla Squad.
Oh.
Yeah. So G'd Up by 50 Cent's group. I have a brain fart here. G-Unit, sorry. Gorilla Squad. Gorilla Unit. Off of Beg for Mercy. And I will also add Poppin' Them Thangs there.
Oh.
And since you had 4, I'll throw in Big Egos.
That's cool.
And,
yeah. Hitman.
If I'm not mistaken, they're all co-produced by Scott Storch.
Oh, yes. Scott Storch.
To me, that really was like the dream team of him, Melman, and Scott Storch. Those were my favorite Dr. Dre produced tracks. So on this note, let's not forget just how important Dr. Dre was to this incredible movement that hip hop is, that defined our lives and that still has a very big impact on our culture. And you do have to do your homework. Dr. Dre is certainly on the Mount Rushmore. He's the most successful hip hop producer of all times in terms of net worth and financial gain. And so you really, really have to, even though you're a trap fan, go back to Dr. Dre, see what he did, and get inspiration for improving your mixing, improving your overall knack for simple yet super effective arrangements. And on this note, BK, we will send our creative firepower to all of our bedroom super producers out there in the universe listening to this cool podcast that we have.
That's right. And on this note, we say go back and listen to the instrumental for Chronic 2001 and peace out.
Peace.
Thanks for listening to the podcast, guys. Remember to subscribe if you like what you hear. We're on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube. Also, if you want to support us, head on to delicatebeats.com. You can find our serum packs, our contact instruments, and also plenty of freebies if you subscribe to the newsletter. Don't forget to follow us on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and once again, keep making that awesome music.